We'd like very much to welcome a distinguished guest who's been on Exopolitics TV, and in our judgment is perhaps one of the most advanced researchers and thinkers that we know of today on extraterrestrial human human relations. Welcome, Mary. This is Mary Rodwell coming to us from Australia.
It's a pleasure, Alfred, to speak with you again.
Thank you. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with Mary Rodwell's work, she is one of the founders, if not the founder, of ACERN, the Australian Extraterrestrial Research Network, and she has investigated over 1,800, and now there may be more ET encounters worldwide from countries including the U.S., Japan, Russia, and others. And these are a broad range of cases. She says mothers and fathers, children, nurses, doctors, police, psychologists, lawyers, teachers, and farmers, and others. She has a very distinguished research career, has been invited to speak at Oxford University, as well as at UFO symposiums in Hong Kong, the US, UK, Canada, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and Hawaii. In Hawaii, we're both privileged to speak at the World Peace Conference, along with our Canadian former Defense Minister, the Honorable Paul Hellyer, I recall. So, welcome back to Exopolitics TV.
Thank you, Alfred, and thank you for everything you said.
Oh, good. Well, it's quite the honor to be with you. Now, you have just published a paper that I'd like to bring to public attention. It's called Extraterrestrials, Human Consciousness and the Dimensions of Soul, the Intimate Connection. And viewers can view that at exopolitics.com. And I would also place a link in the description section of this video. And it starts this way, but I sort of like to summarize it. And maybe I'm oversimplifying. You say that the majority of the public and most researchers believe that contact or encounters with extraterrestrials are defined through two very limited windows of contact experience. One is abduction, and the other is that of the contactee. But your research suggests a far broader category, which is far more common and less physically intrusive. And could you walk us through that and talk about that new category?
Absolutely. What I've discovered with over 2,000 now cases coming worldwide from non-English speaking countries as well as English speaking countries is there seems to be a far broader, if you like, ability that suggests that we are being contacted on a number of levels of consciousness. Some have what I would call a almost shamanic wake-up call through the more traumatic abduction type experience. And that only really includes, perhaps in percentages, about 25% of the 100% that are contacting me. Primarily, what I discovered was when I started out, it was more those with trauma that would contact me. But now, because of my understanding of what I call the new human, the star seeds, the star children, which incorporates metaphysically those that identify them as indigos, crystal children, children of light. There's a lot of metaphysical names given to these children, but in my understanding, I give them the generic term star seeds or star children. And these are ones saying to me, not that they're afraid of aliens or extraterrestrials, but actually they feel like they're their family, that human beings are alien to them, are barbaric and aggressive, and they don't understand this planet. They don't understand how we can be so cruel to one another, so aggressive to one another when this is alien to their nature. They often feel like they've been dumped here by their family, very unhappy about being on a planet that doesn't make any sense. Materialistic values are anathema to them. They often feel like they want to live in more gentle rural societies where they don't feel so bombarded with technology. They are very ecologically aware. Many of them are extremely connected to the natural world. Many feel they can communicate with animals, feel connected to everything they believe has consciousness. So for them, the bombardment of this aggressive, barbaric, warlike planet does not make any sense. Many of them even feel like they've been adopted, even in their own families, because they feel so different to them. And they say, my body feels dense. I know I can do so much more, but I can't do it on this planet. And it's frustrating. And many of them feel totally alone and isolated because their family doesn't understand them. They say, I've always felt different. That many of them feel that what they're taught in schools or in their religious education makes absolutely no sense to them. In fact, many of them have told me they challenge the teacher, or they've challenged their religious teacher and said, it's all wrong, what you're teaching is wrong. And some of them have even got into trouble over it. They've said, I've been put in the naughty corner because I've said you actually haven't got you don't know what you're talking about. And this is an 8-year-old telling a teacher, sorry, but you got it wrong, Many of them have a struggle with even the term God. One little 9-year-old told me from Northern Europe that she says that we're all from Dayland, and that she said in Dayland, where the light and the angels live, and an ultra-terrestrial, and has no gender, she said, the word God is misused. This 9-year-old is telling me, It's incredible. And one of the things that they also say is that school programs you out of your light, as she described it, this 9-year-old. And one little boy in England told me that when he went to school and told them that they teach in a linear fashion where he actually thinks in spirals. So, in other words, none of this makes sense to us, but the primary thing is that nothing they're educated into makes sense. And as this 9-year-old said, you're programmed out of your light. And when I asked this little girl how many star seeds are on the planet now, she said, I think it's about 50%. But she said that of that 50%, only about 20% will retain their light against the programming of education and all the other ways we are stressed so that we become disconnected. Now remember, this is a 9-year-old telling me this, not an adult. So this is the broader panorama of encounters of not only extraterrestrials, of course, but interdimensionals, transcendentals, those from our future. In fact, it's all part of the matrix of dimensions. So this is where my research is going, which really puts things in a far exciting context, but also one which is showing us, I think, where humanity is going.
Right. Now, how exactly do you develop this research? Do you work with cases, and then do you develop principles from there? Is that the method that you use?
What's happened, Alfred, is that people have seen my presentations on YouTube, where I've talked about the new human. Some of them have seen articles in various magazines or whatever. What is fascinating is they find me. And to give you an example, this little girl of 9 I mentioned that comes from Northern Europe, her mother, who's a linguist, had a friend who saw my New Human presentation at Exopolitics in the UK. And the little girl was, she was interested to show the little girl because she knew the little girl spoke 3 different types of what I call star languages. And the little girl saw this presentation where I present a lady speaking one of the languages, and the little girl said to her mum, "That lady knows what I'm talking about." And from that, the mother then contacted me. We had Skype interviews with an interpreter, and the little girl actually sat in front of the computer, told her mum and the linguist, who's the linguist and the translator, to go to another room, and she sat in front of the camera and spoke one of the languages to me. And she then said one of these languages purifies water. And she said that she thinks it and she speaks the language, and the mother said the water actually tastes differently to how it was before. And she said part of her job is to heal water as well as help people wake up and to understand there is a greater paradigm. And this is this from a 9-year-old is quite incredible.
So, and so the contact then that the 9-year-old has is in this third category, which is beyond abduction. It's beyond the normal contact, but you go more into the area of out-of-body experience, or say the between life experience, or even being in the ship, quote, in the ship, so that you would have duty on the ground and duty in the ship. There's some of the cases that were fascinating. For example, the Helen Sanderson case, her daughter. I'm just trying to see how exactly is the 9-year-old prepped for this, and how exactly does this happen?
Well, it's all of the above, depending, I think, on the soul journey. But some of the children describe that when they go on the board craft, and this is going to stretch a lot of people too, okay, is that they sometimes go physically. As one little 8-year-old told me, who lives locally here, that he goes with a couple of his mates onto the craft. Sometimes they're in a kind of container where they can't move. And the blue beings, he said, that's my yearly medical exam. So he quite casually just mentions that. But sometimes, he says, he goes to his mantid family. What is fascinating then is that he says he goes on the craft and he evaporates into his mantid body. And I asked him what that felt like, and he said, well, it feels a bit strange, but that was his only comment. And so he had no problem with describing that. He talked about the mantid as being his family, that's where he's from, and he will go back there once he dies. He described, he even made the trilling sound that the manta make when he hears them. And what was fascinating to me was that I was talking to a gentleman in England, Simon Parks, who also says the mantid are his family, and he sometimes goes into the mantid form on board craft, and he said he helps with the humans. So this little boy of 8 was talking about the identical thing that this 52-year-old town councillor in England was mentioning. And what was fascinating was when I said, and neither of them have spoken, they don't know one another, they're on different parts of the hemispheres, in terms of northern, southern hemisphere. And what I said to Simon was, does anything else happen when you hear the trilling sound? He said, oh yes, they hold me above their head when they're happy with me and make the trilling sound. So I went back to the 8-year-old boy and I said to him, I'll call him Paul. I said to Paul, does anything else happen when you hear the trilling sound? And he said, oh yes, they're holding me above their head because they're happy. Identical in terms of what Simon was saying. Very specific details, but the movement of the soul into another container on board craft is just one of the things that I'm hearing. Another young lady told me that when she was on the craft, she was in a grey form as a scientist. And I said to her, so what are you doing? She said, oh, when I'm on the craft, I need to be in this form because I'm doing scientific work. So I said, well, where's your human body? And she sort of described it kind of hanging on a hook, sort of waiting for her on one side, just like an overcoat. And I said, well, how do you get back? And she described a ball of light leaving her grey form and going and reanimating her human container. And, you know, it's like, what's the deal? You know, what's the big deal? We need different forms for where we are, but some of them will go astrally. And when I talked to a lovely 19-year-old in Melbourne, when I said, you know, when you go out of body sometimes, what form do you take? And she said, my Izoni form. And this is a purple-skinned being, very, very attractive. I've got pictures of her Izoni form. And I said, well, why do you go into your Izoni form? She said, it's one the soul really likes and remembers because I had a wonderful life as an Izoni. And so I go into that form when I astrally travel, when I sometimes go back to different planets or I have things to do. This isn't a big deal for her. This is what she does. And again, it seems that we've got to get away from the limited way we understand our soul and understand that it's capable of things or doing things or being part of maybe many different forms and perhaps all at the same time.
So concepts like reincarnation, if one thinks of going from being someone in the 1850s and then you become someone in the 21st century, that concept we should really put aside and think something more science fiction-y. Is that what you're saying?
We're talking about the quantum universe. We're talking about no such thing as time and space in the way that we understand it in our limited human understanding. And as new scientists, you know, are talking about string theory, dimensions, parallel universes, all of that, and maybe more that we can't conceive of. One of the things that was fascinating in a case that I had with this young lady who was an Izoni, her mother's a scientist who struggled with her daughter remembering many of her past lives when she was 7 or 8, including life in Atlantis as an Izoni. But the mother got quite confronted because the daughter drew a picture of some of her children that she had as an Izoni. The mother got very emotional looking at this, but couldn't work out why. And she said to her daughter, why do I get so emotional when I look at these purple-skinned children? And her daughter said, because you looked after them in that life. And her mother said, what do you mean? And she said, well, actually, I died, and you were my sister, and you looked after these children. Now, what we did was a hypnotic regression to find out more about this. Now, remember, the mum's a scientist. She only knew she had an emotional connection to this picture. When I took her into regression, and her daughter was sitting with us in the regression, and the mother saw in this regression, she was on a planet, and she saw these children, and she said, you know, they've got purple skin, and I feel connected to them. And she said, one of the young girls, she said, is talking to me in this language. And the mother said to me, I can't understand her. And I said, oh, yes, you can. I said, just go back, go into it a little bit more. And Lee, who's the daughter in this life, sort of put her hand up and said, I need to say something. So she put her hand, I said, go ahead. Lee spoke Izoni to her mother, and her mother answered in regression in Izoni. So they were having a conversation in this language from this planet of Izoni. While one was in hypnosis and the other one was conscious, and they were speaking this language. And the mother was understanding the daughter, and the daughter was answering her. And after the mother came out of it, the daughter said, I was very rusty though. I found it very hard to just get into the zone, but she did and was able to speak to the mother. When the mother was out of hypnosis, she couldn't speak the language. So how's that for corroboration?
Right. Now, taking this, in the article, you mentioned the work of Dr. Michael Newton. speaking of
Yes.
hypnotic regression, and what he's done, he's taken over 7,000 cases of hypnotic regression of soul memories of the interlife, what he calls the interlife. And he does mention here and there that he has some cases of, quote, extraterrestrial life, but most of the cases of the interlife and the soul memories appear to be, rather than I formulate the question, how is it that you integrate Dr. Michael Newton's 7,000 cases with your 2,000 cases? How do those come together in your mind?
I think because I've worked in a similar way.
Yeah.
I've worked with people in past lives where they're human, past lives where they're non-human, when sometimes they'll say they're just energy, or they're consciousness, or they're a mineral form, or they are actually moving planetary systems from one dimension to another. There's no boundaries, because we can't have boundaries, because we don't know how far this goes. So you have to have a totally open mandate. But the interesting thing is that there are many similarities to in-between lives, where they go into a space where they connect to their soul grouping, where they feel part of the pool of consciousness, a kind of unity consciousness, where they say, I'm just aware of everything now. I have everything that I need to understand. And so there are many, many correlations between his work and where I go with my client, depending on what their intent is. Some will say, I want to find out about a past life. Some say, I want to find the origin of why I feel connected to some strange planet. And in the regression, they will often go from the soul state, where they've agreed to come into human form this time and have a mandate, which may be that they've come in from their star family to experience and report back to their star family. One of them that fits with that is a woman in her 60s I met, who called herself a walk-in. And by a walk-in, she was saying that she came on a cylindrical craft. She was 9 feet tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, telepathic. They didn't need to eat. Everything was absorbed by light. And she said, and the next thing she remembers is being in a 3-year-old girl's body, where she said, I had to learn how to speak. I had to learn how to eat, because those things I didn't understand. And she talked about her helper, her non-physical helper that supported her. And sometimes this is seen as a ball of light. It may be a blue orb, or it may be another kind of orb of light, which has a consciousness, sometimes has a form. And she described that helped her integrate into her human form. But she goes back regularly to her family, and she calls herself an undercover agent. And she says, I go back to my family and tell them what's happening on this planet, how I understand what's happening. And many of the star seeds that I meet say that they've got a job to do or a mission. And sometimes that is to report back, to explain how human beings work, their psyche, what's happening. And this is investigated, and then it's decided how to assist in the consciousness and the psyche of people to accelerate their awareness and understanding. So there's this matrix of intelligences that are working with us, and we are part of them. That is the point. There's not an us, and there's not a them, because they are us and we are them. So when you get that together, it changes the way that you see everything. And many of my clients say it's much harder to operate in a third dimensional world because they are aware of this. And when you're aware of what is really going on from this incredibly complex but broad picture, it's very hard to get involved in human nonsense, as they call it, because it just doesn't make any sense, and it all is so trivial. You know what I'm talking about, Alfred?
Yes, yes. Now, I still moving with the with the Dr. Michael Newton data. There's a certain point where he says that souls are like almost like drops of light from a vast sea of light. And that's the process of making souls in sort of this spiritual dimension. And then these souls may go into the, I call it the exopolitical dimension, and have experiences as humans, earthling humans, or as mantis or other forms. Now, so from your findings, for example, when the ETs in the ships are doing advanced processes with souls, for example, they're the guardians of souls, like the case of Suzanne Hansen that you and I interviewed, Suzanne Hansen of UFO New Zealand, where she met the soul of her future son as a young girl. And then fast forward, she went on a ship, and the soul of the future son was brought in by a special group of Greys and embedded into and enmeshed into the embryo in her womb. Now, those are do you see that? How is it that the Greys come to have such specialties around souls, which we normally associate, quote, with divinity? You know, usually they say, oh, that's God that does all that. How is it that the Greys, these Greys, have so many duties, intimate duties around our souls?
It's a good question. But first of all, I think we have to understand that there's not, from my research, there's actually many, many different types of Greys too. That needs to be understood. Yeah. One lady told me there's about 165 species of Grey.
Okay.
So that sort of opens that up a little bit. But my understanding is, and one of them is Simon Parkes, when I asked him about the soul transfer, he said there is technology that does this. And he said that you don't always, it isn't always necessarily spontaneous that they will move in, that they have even abilities through technology to move a soul out of the container and deposit it somewhere else. And that may tie into the clone side of things as well.
I see.
So, you know, there's that as well. How they understand all of this, I think it's not maybe just the Greys as well. There are other advanced beings that I think understand the nature of soul and how the soul can transfer into other forms. I've heard some accounts a little bit similar to Suzanne, where Hansen, where one lady said that she had this blue orb following her while she was pregnant and actually knew it was going to be her daughter. So there are others now that seem to have a sense of that they say, before I got pregnant, I knew I was going to have another child and what child it would be. And almost like they were already pre-warned this child was going to be special and different. And in fact, this lady with the 9-year-old said she was told she was going to have a special child when she was pregnant, and this child was going to be a teacher. So sometimes the parent is warned and prepared for the child that's coming in. So there seems to be a great deal of preparation sometimes when it comes to certain individuals that are coming to this planet with a certain mandate or a certain mission, if you like. What is fascinating to me is when I was talking to Lee, this 19-year-old from Melbourne, she told me that we are going from Homo sapiens, Homo noeticus, to Homo Novis, which is another level up from that. And she said Homo noeticus have conscious memory of everything that they need. And this is like, you know, the 9-year-old that I was spoken to that knows her mission is to wake up her family and to heal water. I've got an 8-year-old here that tells me his mission is to help people understand animals and to communicate with animals and to realize everything is connected. So they are fully aware of what their mandate is and what they have to do, and also what they have to watch out for in terms of education. And she said the reason a lot of these starseeds have trouble is because they're kept deliberately stressed. There are a lot of different frequencies on this planet that are unhelpful. She mentioned mobile phones. She mentioned the kinds of foods. All of those things limit our connection or shut down our connection to our innate knowing. And remember, this is a 9-year-old that has full awareness of how we're being shut down and how these children have to. She said it's difficult down here. We've come to volunteer, but it's very, very hard. And you've got a 9-year-old saying it's quite a burden, which is absolutely fascinating to me that you get this, as well. So they are here and they know. And that is the thing that is so heartening for me, is when you've got a lady telling me that's got a 9-year-old son, and his whole focus is looking at conspiracy theories, only they're not theories, and telling her about the moon and what's on the moon. And do you realize that cloud there is hiding a UFO? And Mum, did you realize that a president was assassinated because he knew about the UFOs? He knows this. He can discern past the disinformation. He already knows what to look for. So these children are cluey on levels we can't even imagine. And some of them, actually one little 7-year-old told me only a few days ago that when the Greys were on the other side of the window, they told her to put her finger through the glass. And she did that. And then they actually said, now put your face through the glass. And as she did it, she then got a bit frightened and pulled back, and the glass broke. And then the mother said she told her and told me over Skype that the Greys on the other side put all their heads down like this, focused on the glass, and she saw all the glass coming back together again.
Amazing. Now,
this is a 7-year-old.
Sure. Just to ask you, if that is Homo Noeticus, what is the next step, Homo Novis? What is that like? What have they said about that?
Well, what Lee's told me about Homo Novis is it really is a huge shift then in terms of our awareness. And she said that she believes that a number of Homo Novis are already on the planet. And I said, do you have any sense of how many? And she said, well, the sense is about 150,000 are Homo Novis that have come to help with the shift. But she said that her job is often to look for energy lines. She also does some amazing drawings which are triggers for people to understand the many different beings visiting this planet. She talks about their sense of humor. She talks about their different roles on the planet as well. And some of them, of course, look absolutely human. You would not know the difference. But they all report on what's going on and are in all levels of society. So we've got a lot going on.
So the Homo Novus that are here are technically us? Or are they technically ETs, or are they something new? Or
all she says is that they have come to this planet.
They have come to this planet
as with the awareness of a Homo Novis. So they're an upgrade.
They are an upgrade.
Yeah.
Would you care to? Would you want to speculate as to what the parameters, what some of the profile of a Homo Novus let me, what the parameters would be that would define a Homo Novus consciousness?
As much as I understand it, and I'm still, looking for more data on that, and Lee's been very helpful, it's where we manifest, where, we get to a point where that we can actually literally manifest in the way that we look at avatars, being able to do incredible things. This is where we will be. And whether or not we will need, it's almost like we will choose whether or not we have form.
Okay, so the prophecy, even as I do, so you shall be able to do, or something like that. The kind of avatar.
Avatar, and that's still, there are still other levels above
other levels, yeah. Well, yeah, now, this is a very fascinating story. Now, let's go over to a slightly different track to see what feedback is on that track. And some of the track, and this may be disinformation or not, is that people report negative stories around grays. For example, there's a whole strain of super soldiers that say, oh, there are alliances of some grays with Draco Reptilians, and they are part of a conspiracy or part of an exopolitical alliance to eliminate humans and make this a reptilian planet. Is that something that has any reality to it, or do you hear anything about that at all in this reality?
I do, and it's not as much, there is not so much information on that as I would like to corroborate it absolutely, but certainly some of my clients, even in regression, will tell me there are greys living under the surface that are working with the military, and these are, they say, are renegades from most of the other species, so there are some that are self-serving, including reptilians. One case said that were 2 species of reptilian that were very benevolent, and there was one species that was very self-serving. So there does seem to be factions where people are exposed to all of that and that they are working with the military. And there's and also my understanding is from some of those that have seen the military bases that there are programmed life forms that are cloned from genetic material of the both reptilians and the greys that are programmed by our military to emulate the abduction, so the person believes it's a real extraterrestrial abduction when in fact it's a military orchestrated one with these programmed life forms. And some of the experiences have told me they have been taught how to tell the difference. And a number of experiences have told me that. They know automatically, if they're not in fear, they know automatically the difference between these. So we're looking at some species that are self-serving, with it seems to be. There are some that are programmed life forms in military bases as well, which is adding to the complexity of all of this, that are self-serving and are doing their best to portray all intelligences as negative and self-serving, which of course is not what I'm finding from many of those that speak to me, including, and I mean, for me, the children have a veracity because of the purity of their information. They haven't been seeing talk shows, they don't read books. The clarity of how they speak when they mention, this 9-year-old mentioned the reptilians that are working on some of them are certainly self-serving, some of them. But then again, I've had others that have had the most amazing, loving experiences with reptilians. So I think we've got, one of the things that's been useful is to ask the experiencer, what is the feeling you get from this being? Rather than looking at the cover, what's the feeling that you're getting?
What is the feeling? Now, following up on that, in terms of this shift that we're in, and looking at the outer form of, quote, the present world order or disorder, which seems to be sort of kind of antiquated governmental forms, a mix of monarchies, dictatorships, some representative democracies that are were founded in the 17th century. I mean, we're sort of a kind of an antiquated forms, a financial system that is on the verge of collapse, a war economy in the sense that at any point there are 50 to 150 wars going on, and the quote governments, which are run by the bankers that control this money form, that seems to be how they make their money and how certain power structures resolve their differences. So, and that seems to be, it's not necessarily that Homo sapiens wants that, it's that certain power structures want that. Do you get any feedback from your 2,000 cases as to how the shift of consciousness will manifest in a shift of the order, a collapse of the old order and an emergence of a new order, or something like that?
The dates that seem to be coming up for something dramatic is between, and this is the 9-year-old, but many others too, that are having information given to them by various species of intelligences that they're connected to, is that 2012 to 2017 is the crucial time. And more likely sooner rather than later, there is going to be something very profound, almost like we can't even imagine what this will be. And certainly there does seem to be earth changes. That seems to be a given. But also with that, it's not like it's earth changes that is going to be the end in any way at all, but it is going to be dramatic enough to change a great deal of what we have in the way our world is orchestrated from a socio-economic kind of status. It's going to change through some of these earth changes, but also because of this shift in human consciousness. The waking up, the awakening, this seems to be really interesting when so many hundreds of my clients say, I've got a job to do, but I don't know what it is, and I'm getting anxious, and I feel like I've got to know now, because it's any time I've got to be aware. And one of my answers to that is, because I hear it so many times, Alfred, I'd be a millionaire the times I've heard this, is I think your soul knows where it's going, and it's not going to let you miss the bus. So I think it's about timing and you trusting that when it's time, you will know what you need to do. And it's there, and it's almost like to know too soon would be disabling. The sense is this is going to be so big and so huge that if we had an insight to it, it would put us into a place where we would be paralyzed and no longer feeding the kids, So I think we will only know it when it happens, because it's the only way it can happen that way. But this sense of impending change, huge change, and I've got something to do. I know it's important, but I don't know what it is yet, is okay to sit with that, because I think that it is something we're just going to have to trust that the soul knows exactly what it's doing and will let us know when it's time.
So this is really a kind of an inside-out change. That is it that we're all having this third kind of contact at once? Is that the process?
I believe it's humanity. I believe we're all being challenged to grow and to change. Some of us will open to it, and some of us won't. And that, I think, is the choice. One of the scientists that I'm working with called it low-frequency people and high-frequency people. And we can choose to be a high-frequency person or a low-frequency. And she said, and that will even be with our diet. What we choose to eat, which raises our frequency, and what we choose to explore. So there is a choice in that. At the end of the day, I think that's whether or not it means some kind of shift, as some people say that there will be two Earths, possibly. I don't know.
That there will be what?
two Earths. There might be the ones that choose to stay in the third dimension density, and those that choose to move to a higher dimensional frequency with a different kind of experience. I don't know. I mean, all of this is just hypotheses. It's possible that it's that. Or it's possible, like the 100th monkey, that when 10% or 50% of the planet gets it, everybody else does, and people wake up. And I've often looked at that in the terms of we only use 5% of our DNA, the rest is switched off, it seems. Maybe this is when we get switched on, and all the downloads and the compressed files that the children and the adults are getting with these scripts and with these languages may be the software for the new reality, for the new switched on hard drive, the new human. I don't know, it's just a hypothesis.
Now, toward the end of your article, you ask yourself, why are we so important to the extraterrestrial intelligences? So I ask you that. Why is Earth and why is humanity so important to the extraterrestrial intelligences? I mean, it seems that, you know, we have a wide variety that are involved in this. Why are we so important to the extraterrestrial intelligences?
Because we're part of them. We're their children. And what I was told by the little 8-year-old was they go to other dimensions, other galaxies, other universes, and they seed other planets, and they are forever doing this, that they take their, you know, the seeds of life to many different types of environments. He even mentioned a universe full of artificial planets of different forms. So I think it's part of us learning to grow and experience as a soul, but also as connected to the family, the galactic universal family as well. It's part of this whole matrix of experience. And that's why we're important, because they're learning from us and we are learning from them. It is always a cooperative soul exchange. And because in the end, we're all the same, because we come from the same source.
Now, given what you've said, I mean, I'm sitting here at the edge of my seat because it seems like we're coming to a culmination of an important process. What suggestions or directions or insights would you leave our viewers with, or suggestions do you have for them to apply in their personal lives?
I think for me now, the biggest and hardest thing for everyone is trust. And it's about trusting that we are going to be fine, that the soul is eternal, and whatever our mandate is for being on this planet and for whatever is meant to happen for us as a soul is perfect, and it's what we've chosen. And to let go of this need to fix and sort and what have you, just be true to yourself, and to trust that wherever we're meant to go with this, we've chosen a really, really interesting time, and to enjoy the journey.
And if viewers want to follow your work more closely and or get in touch with you, or both, how can they do that?
Well, I've got a website, ACERN.com.au, but Google Mary Rodwell and the website will come up, and you will see my emails and contact details and everything else that goes with that. So it's very, very easy.
Well, we want to thank you for spending such quality time with us. I know that every time that we have been with you, we've been significantly expanded, and I have to credit you with being one of my most profound teachers. So thank you, and we look forward to having you on our program from time to time as things develop. So thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Alfred. It's always a pleasure speaking with you.
Great. Thank you.